Okay, today we're going to talk more about user interfaces, and in particular, I want to talk about layouts, which help structure the look of the program, and then how to structure your action listeners. And there's some choices to be made. And last time we did it one way, I'm going to show it a slightly different way this time. All right, so as a review, Java has a lot of components you can add to a program. And typically what we do is inherit from one of those components to provide usually both specialized data and some specialized behavior to go along with that data. And then we respond to events by implementing an interface, which again is a class with only abstract methods. For the things like button presses, we implement the action listener interface. Okay, so we talked a little bit last time about how, again, as we write these user interface programs, they have a little different structure than our old programs, which typically flowed from some beginning, maybe looped, maybe made a decision, but sort of flowed from beginning to end, and you could sort of see exactly what was going to happen in that program. With our GUI programs, our graphical user interface programs, we have a hidden event loop that Java provides, and when an event is detected, it triggers some specific little method to run. So it's a little more fragmented is, I guess, the main thing to think about here. And an event can be many different things. It's something that like a user does. It can be something like getting some notification from the operating system. It could be some networking kind of thing. But it's something that's interpreted as an action to respond to. And Java uses these things called listeners. And we've looked at this action listener. There are other kind of listeners as well that provide events or check for events. So, when I go around and I click on something, that's my operating system on my computer interpreting that click. Java basically accepts those and puts it in some sort of form that our program can understand, tries to put it like if it's on a button, it becomes a button press rather than just like a mouse click. And then it sees if there's a listener available for that particular event and then sends the event to that listener. One thing with listeners is that they should execute quickly. In other words, if you have a listener and maybe you decide to block and wait for the user to type in something, the program will become unresponsive. And so if you drag it around the screen, it won't refresh its view, and that's a bad thing. So basically, listeners should sort of do something and then get out as fast as it can. And there's techniques for dealing with trying to do larger computations based on some event. And it should try to respond to high-level things. So you want to program for button presses rather than mouse clicks if that's what you want to do. Don't always stick at the mouse click level. Okay, so we last time built up a JFrame. And again, it has like a title and a border, space for a menu, something called the content pane, and that's where you can put other components. We put what did we put in there last time? Our counting button was what we put in. We added it to the content pane. So we did a add method call and added a button. That actually adds a button to this content pane. This content pane is usually some sort of panel. So there's one called a JPanel. It's a container, and containers are designed to hold other containers and components. And you can make your own panel, the content frame. You can use the set content pane method on the frame, and it replaces that default one with a custom container. Layouts control how things are arranged, and one thing to keep in mind with user interface programs is that typically you don't say put this exactly here and this one exactly here. You say I want things to go from left to right or up to down or in a grid, and the reason for that is you want to make it so it can respond to windows as they move around and change sizes and stuff, and so you want to communicate intent there and not precise positions. So there's a whole set of tutorials on this you can look at that give nice, show you pictures of how these look like, and I'd recommend you take a look at those. But briefly, these often form some kind of hierarchy, and this is actually the tricky part about using this is that you don't sort of just make one thing and then put everything in there. You have to think about, okay, there's a J frame, and in that might be a panel, and inside that is some sort of layout that describes how other things are arranged, and maybe there's multiple panels inside that attached to that layout, and inside one of those panels are some buttons, inside another one is a slider, and so on. And you have to kind of train yourself to look at these different things and see like what kind of arrangement might make sense to do what you want it to do. So the default layout, if you don't do anything, specify anything, it's called a flow layout, and it goes horizontally. There's also a grid layout. You basically say how many rows and columns you want, and it has a lot of options, like you can have elements that span 2 rows or 2 columns or so on. There's a border layout that has sort of like a big area and then a small area. And the trick is to start seeing, like how, given these tools, how would you build something? So here, oops, where did my cursor go? Okay. Here, there's a collection of this button, and these are J labels, so they hold text. And how would you make this? It's not just something that flows from left to right. It's not something that goes like this. It's not necessarily a grid. And again, there's different ways to do it that would work, but you have to start seeing, like how could you make something like this? Well, when I see it, I see part of it being a 2x2 grid layout on some panel that takes up this portion of the screen here. And I would put all those things, the panel, the button, in a flow layout from left to right. So again, the top layer is a single panel. Attached to that single panel is a flow layout. In that flow layout is another panel, and then a button, and then a button. Inside this panel is a grid layout, and in the grid layout are these 4 things, right? So it's like you have to build a hierarchy. You have to build it up bit by bit, and you're always adding plenty of panels and plenty of layouts to make this work. You probably could have done this with a single grid layout and told this to span 2 rows and this to span 2 rows or something like that. So that's an alternative. And maybe that's, well, depends. You think it's trickier to add sort of layers of panels, or trickier to look up the way to span a column or not. But what I want you to think of it when you're doing these things is you need to add in intermediate panels to hold sub areas of the user interface. And that's really the trick to all this thing. So now let's make a little app that has some multiple buttons, and we're going to show you how to use a listener to handle excuse me, to handle these multiple buttons. Again, one choice would be to make each button be a custom class with their own action listener. But if they don't really do anything, like they don't have persistent storage that's needed, sometimes it's easier to do it all in one place. And I want to show you an example of how to do that. Okay, so what we're going to do here is make a custom app. And an app, again, basically is some kind of J-frame. And so what we're really saying, what we want to do is make a custom J-frame that has certain things inside it. And so I'm going to, instead of extending JButton like we did last time, I'm going to say we're going to extend JFrame. And we have to import it. And someone last time was suggesting that maybe better off importing everything from Swing, so we don't have to do that for every step, and maybe I'll give that a try this time. Okay, so in the last one, we made a JFrame down here and added in the custom button that we defined up here. Here we're making a custom JFrame. So remember, this thing is a JFrame. And so what do we need? We need a constructor for our JFrame thing, which is the simple app listener constructor. And doesn't take any data in. Okay, so when I make a constructor for something that inherits from another class, the first step is to construct the super part of this object. In other words, I need to call the super constructor here, and the constructor for JFrame takes in a title. It goes in the title bar. So I'm just going to call this simple app. And you might recall that before we had to set a default close operation. We said, hey, JFrame should quit the program when the window is closed. And so again, on the simple app listener, I'm going to set the default close operation, and I'm going to set it to this JFrame exit on close. Okay, so again, where does this come from? Well, for this object, I inherit from JFrame. So this is really the JFrame method, set default close operation, and I'm applying it to this object. And again, I don't have to say this unless it's unclear what's going on. So simple app listener is a kind of JFrame, and so it has a set default close operation, and I'm setting that. All right, so what are we going to do in this application? I want to make two buttons and have it respond to those two clicks. And I'm going to make those two buttons be standard J buttons, and I'm going to make them instance variables of a class. Quit. So I have these two instance variables declared. We still have to make the buttons, right? So I'm going to say that say hi equals a new J button. I think it's kind of easy to get confused and think this is really making it for us up here, right? It's just declaring it, and then down here I have to actually initialize it with something. And we provide the text that we want to go on the button. Oops. I'm trying to lift up my computer a little bit, and it's like, it makes it hard to type, so my head's not like way down there. But and then quit equals a new J button quit. And again, remember these are standard buttons, so they don't have their own action listener attached to them right now. We don't have any way to say what they do, and the trick to this program is going to be showing you how to use an action listener on the JFrame to handle these buttons. All right, so I need to add them. I could add them to the content pane of the simple app, but I want to have a little more control over what's going on. So I'm going to make a JPanel. And you know, if multiple panels, you should name them like top panel and button panel or something like that, something a little more descriptive. And so I make a new panel that's pretty basic, and I'm going to add to the panel. So panels you add components to, and other panels if you need another layer in there. Hey, why are we complaining here? New panel. It's a new J panel. So I'm going to add the say hi button, and I'm going to add the quit button. And then I'm going to set the content pane of my JFrame to be the panel. Now in this case, the panel's not doing anything special, so it doesn't really need to be a new one that I'm throwing in there. But again, as you add more layers, it is helpful to have some control over what's going on here. Okay, so, and I haven't done any layout stuff or anything like that yet, but that's fine. Okay, so when we have a JFrame, we set the default closeout, we give it a title, we set the default close operation, we add things to it, and then we have to pack the panel, or pack the frame around all the things that we've added. And that's all we need to do to set up this JFrame. So what's going to happen next? I'm going to make in main a new one of these things. Simple app listener. I'll just call it app, I guess, and it's a new simple app listener, and I'm going to make it visible, right? That's the final thing you have to do to get your program going. Set visible to true. And again, where do these come from? These are what are inherited from JFrame, and so I don't have to re-implement them or anything like that. All right, let's clean that up a little bit. Get rid of that too. Run it. Okay, so here is our simple app, and these buttons don't actually do anything. They were just named buttons. All a J button does without any action associated with it is just flash when it's clicked. Let's experiment with the layout real fast before we do anything else. I'm going to do something called the box layout, and I have to make a new box layout. And again, this is just me going through the that tutorial and looking at ones that look sort of interesting. And so I'm going to associate this layout with a panel, and then I'm going to say which way it's oriented. So it has different settings, page axis, and then I'm going to set on the panel, set layout box. And okay, so sort of two parts. One is you associate, when you build it, you associate with the panel, and then you say, hey panel, use this layout. If I run it again, I gotta grab it so I can bring it over here. It's this page axis, so it made like a vertical type layout on this thing. So not too exciting, but basically you have a little control over how it's supposed to look like, and that's the important thing. And it's this form. You have a panel, you have a layout, you set the layout on the panel, and then you just add the components to the panel. You don't add the components to the layout, you just set it to the panel, and whatever layout is on that panel is one that gets used to arrange these buttons here. All right. I find that a little confusing. I sort of want to have, you attach these things, the components, to a layout, and have, it feels like you have a little more control that way, but that's not how it works. All right, so the main problem is that this doesn't do anything yet. So instead of adding a action listener on each button, I'm going to add one on the entire frame. And that's not part of Swing. It has its own import. It's part of AWT event, so I had to do it there. And again, when I implement this interface, I have to provide code for the method that it wants, and the method it wants is the action performed method. Okay, so what's going to go on in here? Well, I have to decide whether I clicked on the say hi button or the quit button. So the way I could do that is I first ask this E object that is associated with the event, what was the source of the event? All right, so there's this particular method it has, get source, and I'm going to see if that is the say hi button. Okay, so one thing, notice I actually could have, if I wanted to, made a button here, like JButton other equals new JButton. I could attach that to the panel and it would exist. It's fine. But I don't have any way to access it down in here. So if I just have a local variable here and add it, it doesn't go away. It's still attached to this frame and panel and so on. But I don't have a reference for it. So by making it an instance variable, I retain that reference, and I can check against that reference down in this action performed method. So I'm asking if the thing that was clicked is equal to our say hi instance variable. And again, that's a decision. Sometimes you're making things like, I don't know, like let's say a text label, a J label that just has some words on it. I can make that as a local variable in here, add it to the J panel, and it would still show up. It won't like magically go away just because I leave the method, but I wouldn't have any way to sort of check against it down here. So again, if you're using these things in your code, you make them an instance variable so you can get to them. And if they're just being there to build up the look of the UI, you can make them in that constructor and then just make them local variables and add them into the panel. All right, we'll see some more examples of that. But so what should happen here? Well, I'm going to very ugly use a system out print line here, which is considering I have a user interface, a GUI here, and then I'm going to throw stuff to the console. It's kind of a bad idea, I think, but I'm just trying to get the idea across. Hi. Okay, let's. And notice I don't say dot equals here because I'm going to see if the reference returned by get source, the actual object, is the same object as the say hi instance variable. So I say hi and and nothing happens. Why is that? It's for the same reason I claimed last time that this is going to be something that catches you unawares many, many times. We did not add the action listener to the object, right? Add action listener. Add action listener. Oh, I have to attach it to, okay, it's the button that gets this action listener attached to it. Right? So it says, hey button, how are you going to respond to events? I'm going to use the action listener as part of this JFrame action perform. And it's the one that's going to decide which one I do here. Okay, so if I grab my little application and click say hi. Hi, 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 hi. All right, so it's a little confusing. One is we're making this action performed is implemented by the JFrame. But it really is the button that's being clicked. And so to the button, I have to add this action listener and say, hey, use the action listener that's part of the JFrame. So this gets clicked. This action event gets sent here. It says what was clicked? Well, it was the say hi button, so print out hi. So this could have been a custom method of a sort of say hi class or something like that. But it's such a throwaway little action. There's no data associated with it. It hardly seems like a real class, right? It's not doing much. So all we're trying to say is, hey, if it was this button that was clicked, just print hi, right? We don't have to store any information associated with it or anything like that. Okay, how about the quit thing then? If let's just steal this line. If the get source is quit, then what can I do? There is something called dispose for these frames, and that basically means go away. Notice, so this is basically closing the window, and when the window's closed, it also stops the program. So if I run this, so we're making a choice here now, right? We're trying to decide whether it was the hi that's clicked, so I click hi, or I click quit, and it didn't do anything. Why is that? We know the answer. I need to add to the quit. Gets me every time. We need to add to the quit the action listener so it knows to activate that method when we hit quit. Okay, so I hit hi, hit quit. Yay! It went away, and then it terminated the program. Okay, so again, I think it's easy to make mistakes here, as you can see. You have to get sort of this pattern in your mind, and again, it's not like it doesn't compile, it doesn't crash, it just doesn't do anything, and you have to kind of be hyper alert to these missing steps. And the steps are, we implement this interface. That requires us to have code for this method. And here we can check to see what it was that was clicked. And in order to send that click to these things, we have to add the action listener to them. So it's those three things that are critical for success on this. And again, this is a custom J-frame that has these things in it. And the reason that's good to have this custom J-frame is that we can have, it's a class, we can have instance variables, and those instance variables get used down in the action performed to check which one is being used. Now, again, it's tempting maybe to make everything be in like the J-frames action performed and have huge chunks of code here. But if you wanted to have like a counting button, rather than make the J-frame store the count and have the logic to update the count, I would make that a custom class for the counting button, send the functionality down there, and just use a custom button and add it up here, right? So as soon as you hit a certain amount of complexity on what's going on with this component, you'd have to decide whether to just give it a tiny little bit of behavior, like in something like this, or whether you write a class for it and make it its own thing. And you shouldn't be shy about making your own class, is all I can say. Okay, we'll be playing around with this more obviously, but this is a good start for trying out a layout and trying out a few buttons.